Welcome back to the Naval News, everybody. I want to give credit to the United States Naval Institute for making this visual. They publish this every week, and it gives us an idea of where our fleets are around the world. We're going to begin with the Gerald R. Ford off the coast of Virginia, doing some kind of pre-oversea movement workup, probably. George H.W. Bush Carrier Strike Group continues to operate in the Mediterranean. They've been there since August. The Ronald Reagan continues to get maintenance in Japan, with the USS America at sea, but just south of Japan there. Looks like it's pretty close to Okinawa. But the big story today is the South China Sea. We have two big fleets working together, making an even bigger fleet. The Makin Island Amphibious Ready Group, which is full of Marines. It's the 13th Expeditionary Unit. So, big credit to those guys. Are working with the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group. And the Navy published a couple of really cool photos. Here we have the Nimitz being resupplied. This is called UNREP, or underway replenishment. It's a very regular routine, something we do all the time, but our carriers need it. These carriers are like floating cities. They have like 5,000 souls on board that need constant food, water, and other things. And so there's always, or regularly, I should say, these unreps happen. And here we have a picture of the Makin Island ARG. They put some floating targets out in the water there and blasted it with small arm and cannon fire, setting it on fire, keeping those, small boat skills strong, anti-small boat. So good to see both the United States Navy and the Marine Corps working together. Whenever we do that, that is really, the full effect of what we can accomplish in terms of power projection. The Navy controls, subsea, surface, air, and even cyber now in terms of domains. The Marine Corps, very good at going ashore and breaking things and collecting crayons, and then coming back with loot. And so whenever we go to sea with these two forces together, we can project that force anywhere in the world. And right now it's in the South China Sea, which is the topic of today's video. So we're going to begin taking a little bit deeper and deeper look into the South China Sea as we go through this year. But we're going to give you a little primer today with the Philippines and the China and their history and what happened last week, how this all came to a head. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's credit CSIS, that's Center for Strategic International Studies, publishes these very well thought out maps of the South China Sea explaining territorial waters and whatnot. So this is the South China Sea. This is bordered by Vietnam, Philippines, and China there at the north. The solid blue line is China's territorial waters. The Philippines are the brown solid line, territorial waters. Now the dashed lines, the blue one is the exclusive economic zone, 200 miles out from the Chinese territorial waters. And the brown black dashed line is 200 nautical miles from the territorial waters of Philippines. Now you'll notice that those exclusive economic zones often overlap because countries are often closer than 400 miles together. And that's the case here. And whenever you see an EEZ that overlaps, both countries can operate in those EEZs, collecting resources, which most commonly in this area is fish, but becoming more common is also natural gas and oil, which has been discovered in the South China Sea. Just a matter of who's going to go get it first. Now, if you're observant, you'll notice these dashed lines, like this dashed line right here next to me. That's called the 9 dash line. There's also a 10 and 11 dash line. We're not going to get into those. So what the 9 dash line is right after World War II, the Chinese Revolution kicked off again, just kept going because it was going before World War II, was on pause during World War II, and then finished up in the next 2 years after World War II. So 1947, the Republic of China gets kicked out to the island of Formosa, now called Taiwan, and the CCP, or the Chinese Communist Party, takes over the mainland. And what they do to the map, they're looking all around the world, and maps are being redrawn in Europe with Soviet bloc occupation. Japan's being occupied by American forces after World War II. And so they want to redraw some of the map as well, and they draw the 9 dash line in 1947, saying that the waters within these 9 dashes and all the atolls and shoals and reefs and natural resources are claimed by China. And China at that time gave no justification for that and did not enforce it. It was just a 9 dash line that they claimed for decades, from 1947 all the way until 1995. 1995, bit of a pivotal year in our story because that is the first time China actually claimed its first landmass. It's actually a reef called Mischief Reef. And the way they claimed a reef was with fishermen because it's submerged, it's underwater. So they started fishing in and around Mischief Reef and using its inner area as a bit of a shelter or a harbor. But the purpose of the fishing fleet there wasn't just to find fish and go fishing. It was to claim the land, to occupy, to squat on this area. And so, as you can see here, it's a reef because at high tide, it is completely submerged. And whenever there's a low tide, there's a little bit of landmass visible, but it's still legally called a reef. And this is what they want to do with it. Now, this photo is from 2012, so you can still see it. 2012, there's really no landmass here. This is all submerged, you know, at high tide. But what they've done is they've managed to reclaim over the past 10 or 15 years, reclaim a lot of land with dredging machines, putting sand on top of sand, until finally they have what is a island in effect. They also surrounded this white sand area, sandbar, if you will, with a seawall to keep the sand from going back into the sea. So they were very smart in doing this. It took many years to do this. Here's an up-close picture. Credit to CSIS and Global Digital for this as well. These photos are from 2020. And so they've been building over the past 10 years, lots of facilities here, including, you know, housing. They have power plants now on board. And, I want you to notice down here, look at all this. This is the seawall here. It goes all the way around the inside of the reef. And they've turned that seawall into a pier so they can park ships all the way around the inside of that white area there. All right. And then they also have an airstrip here now as well, so they can get resupplied via air. They can also operate military, and they do operate military out of Mischief Reef. So this all began in 1995. We're sitting here in 2023 looking at what they did to this island. It's just basically an illegal occupation of a reef. It's still, by the way, classified a reef, regardless of what China did to it. That is claimed by Vietnam as well. So China's not the only one claiming this island, but they are the only one physically on the island. And it's inside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. They have absolutely no claim to this island, but China doesn't care about that. China doesn't care about claims or laws. All they care about is the 9-dash line, and everything in the South China Sea belongs to China. So that's Mischief Reef. That's 1995 when that began, and bringing it up through till today. Today's story kind of focuses on a nearby island about 5 miles away. It's a shoal, to use proper terms, called Second Thomas Shoal. Second Thomas Shoal was militarily occupied 2 years later in 1997, probably in response to Chinese loitering, squatting, and eventually land developing of Mischief Reef. Second Thomas Shoal is also inside the exclusive economic zone of Philippines. And this is what they did to it. So 1997, they take this old American World War II era tank landing ship that has been since transferred to the Philippine Navy. So it is now a BRP. The name is Sierra Madre. And Sierra Madre, this ship has a bit of a cult following online. If you want to go check that out, go down that rabbit hole, it's pretty interesting. But what's clear about the Sierra Madre in today's terms is that it's not seaworthy. It's simply a beached ship that is used as a shelter there, and it is occupied by the Philippine Marine Corps. There's a detachment there. There's some picture of some Marines that were there a few years ago. This gives you an idea of the type of people that are living on board this shelter on this shoal. And this shoal requires regular resupply. It doesn't have a freshwater source. It doesn't have any food to sustain a platoon or a squad of Marines, as you see here. So it has to receive regular deliveries, and it does. But after Philippines occupied this shoal, they decided to take and challenge China in court, in international court, and try to get them out of their EEZ, right? So let's skip ahead another decade to 2013. So we're going from 1997 to 2013. 2013, the Philippines takes the Republic of China, the ROC, to international court. This is the United Nations Convention of Law on the Sea. This is the global courtroom for all things on the sea, okay? And China decided in 2013, when these charges were brought forward, and to be arbitrated in this court, China decided not to represent itself and said, or legally informed the United Nations, that China does not recognize or accept the United Nations Convention authority on the sea. And that's really all you need to know about China and what they think of law on the sea and other nations, at sea, is they simply don't care. It's China and whatever China wants, and it's what anybody else thinks, like this court or laws or conventions or even tradition at sea. It doesn't matter if it's not in line with Chinese desires and values. It's not legal. They literally did not even bother showing up to court as the proceedings went on from 2013 to 2016. So as you can imagine, whenever you have one side showing all of its evidence and making its claim, and it's also the plaintiff, and the defendant doesn't even show up, well, that's more like a grand jury trial than an actual trial. And so, of course, the United Nations Convention, I'll shorten to the convention, favored inside to the side of the Philippines, saying that yes, the islands, there's specifically 3 of them, one of which was Second Thomas Shoal, the one where the Marines are, belongs to the Philippines. Okay. It's uncontested now. But because China doesn't recognize this court, they didn't abide by it. They're still going by the 9 dashes someone drew in the South China Sea from 1947 and whatever else is convenient for them that day. That's what we're dealing with whenever it comes to dealing with China. It's ridiculous. They act juvenile whenever it comes to anything legal. That includes stealing military and intellectual property to respecting borders. They just don't. But let's get back on topic here. All right, so this is the Philippine Coast Guard ship. This is the ship, it's BRP Malapascua, if I'm saying that name right. It's responsible for resupplying the Second Thomas Shoal, okay? Or escorting supply ships, which could be smaller boats, going out to them, because this is... it's not that far of a trip from the Philippines out to the shoals here. But oftentimes, this ship alone has the water, the food, is going out. And that is the case in today's story. So here is a picture of Mischief Reef, Second Thomas Shoal, and Sabina Shoal. The Philippines are off to the right-hand side of this graphic here. And what I've done here is I've overlaid the AIS, the automatic identification system that is required on all civilian ships and Coast Guard vessels from the Philippine ship on February 5th. This happened just over a week ago now, where they were heading south down by Sabina Shoal with intent of resupplying Second Thomas Island. On February 5th, they were intercepted by a Chinese Coast Guard, two Chinese Coast Guard ships, and literally got in front of the ship and stopped, causing the Philippine Coast Guard ship to take evasive action, as you see here. The red is an indication of speed. Red would be near dead in the water, very slow. So they're transiting in yellow. They get confronted by the Chinese Coast Guard vessel that blocks their path, giving the Philippine ship a choice of either stopping, colliding, or evading. And they decide to evade, as you see here. They evade around the Coast Guard ship and start making their way towards Second Thomas Island. China knows that this is the resupply ship, and they're trying to prevent the resupply of these Marines. I would call that a blockade, but a blockade is an act of war, so nobody wants to use that term for what's going on here. So after they maneuver around the Chinese Coast Guard ship once, the very next day, this is actually just a couple hours later, but it's the next day technically, it happens again, where the 2 Chinese Coast Guard ships try to maneuver in front of the Philippine ship, forcing it towards the Sabina Shoal, where it could possibly run aground. Well, again, they do evasive maneuvers back up to the north and circle around the Chinese Coast Guard ships and make their way towards the Second Thomas Shoal and continue on with their mission. This type of harassment did not just begin here. This is just our beginning of documenting it and bringing it to you. This has been going on for a while, but something that is new to me, even though this did happen with airplanes, Chinese pilots shining these green lasers, high-intensity laser beams into the pilot's eyes of other planes. This is now happening at sea too, and ships are able to have much more high-powered lasers than a pilot holding a little pen light. And here's a picture released by the Philippine Navy saying this is what they had to deal with trying to get around these ships. And some Philippine crew members on the bridge were temporarily blinded by this green laser. So there's a lot of power behind this laser. The ship there on the right is the Philippine Coast Guard vessel that was being, restricted. We'll use that word. I don't want to use the word blockaded, because once you go down the blockade route, things could escalate. And here's another official photo released from Philippines. Here you can see the distance, as they're going away from the ship. There's at least, perhaps a nautical mile here, and that green laser is pretty intense, putting a blind spot on the camera there. So this is the type of activity that China's doing. It's illegal. It's in the gray zone. Probably not an act of war. Nobody wants to go that far. But until someone stands up to China conducting this, all they're going to do is continue to escalate until a war does happen. So we need to find a middle ground, curbing or stopping this activity without escalating it. And the one thing we did, the United States Navy did during the Cold Wars, whenever the USSR, or the Soviet Union, Navy would come out, and they would not use lasers, obviously, but they would try to get in our way and cause a collision. We would just maintain our course and speed, get on the radio and tell them, if you collide with us, that's your fault. And sometimes collisions did happen, okay? Both ships would get damaged, go back and repair it, and so forth. So why doesn't the Philippines do this? Why are Chinese trying to instigate a potential collision and the Philippines not? Well, it all comes down to the ability to replace these ships. China can replace the ship, even if it's completely sunk, with just another ship. The Philippine Coast Guard, they don't have that capability. If this ship gets damaged, they may struggle to try and resupply those Marines on that shoal, because they don't have the money, the infrastructure, the readiness, if you will, to easily repair and replace this Coast Guard vessel. So it really comes down to logistics in that case. And the second thing that I want you to think about is China's looking for a reason to escalate. A collision at sea between these two Coast Guard ships could result in military occupation of that area for defensive reasons, to prevent another collision, would be their justification. Completely ridiculous. But this is the type of people we're talking about. They don't respect any kind of law or order or borders or anything like that, but they're very opportunistic in escalating tensions because they can afford to. China can afford to lose men and ships and replace them, whereas the Philippines in this case have less of a bench, if you will, to use a sports analogy. So going forward, we're going to continue to talk about South China Sea in more and more detail. Perhaps we'll talk about, Australia and Vietnam and Brunei claims in that, and also show you what some of the resources are in South China Sea. Look forward to that all coming up. I want to thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time. If you're a long-time listener or watcher of my series, please stick around for 2 minutes. I have a message for you. Let's wait for everybody to end the video. Okay, we're going to start now. Listen, I want to say thank you very much to everybody that's been messaging me. I have a story to tell here. This is me a year ago this month. We were traveling the southeastern part of the United States, going from museum to museum, making museum videos for the Patreons. You YouTubers never saw this, but the Patreons certainly did. And whenever I saw the footage of myself going around these museums and seeing how much weight I had gained over the past 15 years, it was a real wake-up call for me. So I changed my life a year ago. The first thing I changed was my diet, because weight loss and fitness begins in the kitchen, not the gym. Remember that. But I was so overweight, I had to do everything. So I changed my diet to a low-carb, high-protein diet. I went to the gym. I started doing cardio, flexibility exercises, including weightlifting. I began seeing my doctor regularly and following his advice. And then the last thing I had to do, because all that still wasn't really working as effective as I wanted to, I had to cut my portions like in half. And so my body for years was used to getting these thousands of calories. That was more calories than I could burn off in a day, and thus weight gain. It's that simple. It's just math. So there's no secret pill to losing weight here, but I want to thank everybody who noticed my weight loss over the past year, especially in the kind of last 3 months. And why were the last 3 months more effective than the last 9 months of my fitness? Well, there's one device that did help me. And I want to say, before I even go on, this is not a sponsored segment. I don't have a link for you. I don't have a discount code, but I do have a story of how something helped me lose weight. So whenever I started cutting down my portions to about half the calories I was conditioned to eating every day, my body's natural response was to have cravings for sugar, salt, something savory tasting sometimes. It was just my body was saying, give me calories, this is not normal. And so I'm slowly conditioning my body out of that. But to fight those cravings, I found that this device that was a sponsor many months ago actually worked for me. So it's called Fume, and it's this little flavor diffuse inhaler device. This is not a vape. There's no battery, there's no heat. This thing puts flavor in your mouth with such intensity that it helped me curb those cravings so that I could be calm, go make a portion of food that was half of what it used to be, and then eat that instead of just snacking or something high calorie. So listen, if you're like me and you have an overeating condition that you've taught your body to take on 2,500 to 3,500 calories and you're not burning that off and you're getting those cravings whenever you reduce the calories, something that helped me reduce those cravings was this Fume flavor diffuse device. Okay, again, it's not a vape, there's no batteries, there's no heat, there's nothing in this except flavor, and it really helped me out. So I guess you could go to the website, it's tryfume.com, no discount codes, not a promotion, not a paid endorsement. This is a thing that worked for me, and maybe it'll work for you too. Give it a shot. Okay, anyway, this is the end of the video. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.